excited to share with you the culmination of one of our recently funded projects led by Dr. Frances Robertson, who is with San Juan County. And today we are going to dive in shortly, but I am going to give you a little bit of background on the Habitat Strategic Initiative first. And following that, Frances will lead her presentation, and we'll have a discussion at the end, Q&A as well as a discussion, really opening it up to all of us. As I mentioned earlier, this presentation is being recorded and will be put on our website. So please, we'll announce that, and please share with those. I know we got several folks saying they couldn't make it today. So first, a little bit about the Habitat Strategic Initiative. We are a multi-agency team led by the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Department of Natural Resources under the National Estuary Program. Our mission is to enable and accelerate habitat protection and restoration through Puget Sound, focusing on 4 implementation strategies, which include floodplains and estuaries, land development and cover, marine vegetation, and shoreline armory. We accomplish this work through a variety of pathways. First and foremost, we distribute this EPA funding to support critical and traditionally harder to fund habitat projects, one of which we'll be hearing about today. We also convene and support collaborative partnerships across Puget Sound recovery community and lead strategic planning processes that really center habitat restoration priorities and needs. And today's presentation will highlight the key findings from one of the Habitat Strategic Initiative's recently funded projects, which conducted an inventory of creosote pilings in San Juan County. This project was based upon a near-term action submitted to the 2018 to 2022 action agenda, and it was recommended for funding by the San Juan Local Integrating Organization to the Habitat Strategic Initiative, as our funding was transitioning from implementing the 2018 to 2020 action agenda to the current action agenda. So it's kind of in this transition period. And results from the project allow the county and landowners to more efficiently plan for piling removal and understand their proximity to critical nearshore habitat like eelgrass and kelp. The project also pilots creosote piling inventory approaches that could be replicated by others in Puget Sound looking to also tackle your creosote challenges. I'm going to hand the floor over to Dr. Frances Robertson shortly, who is the Marine Project Manager for San Juan County. But let me first introduce her. It's been an absolute pleasure working with her on this project. She is a marine wildlife biologist with 20 years of professional experience in scientific ecological research and project management in the marine environment. She leads a variety of projects related to eelgrass protection, shoreline restoration, reducing vessel impacts on endangered whale species. In addition, Frances provides expertise in permitting and project management as it relates to working with the county's departments as they work with federal requirements and around conservation and mitigation. As a marine scientist, she has really broadened the county's ability to successfully implement scientifically robust projects. And again, it's been an honor to work with you on this project, Dr. Robertson, and I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you very much, Bree. Let me just find my slides here and bring them up. Okay, and hang on, let's see. Okay, can everyone see my slides?
Looks great.
Great. Okay, great. I will take it away then. So good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us this morning as we share the results of this study that we've undertaken here in San Juan County. Just to give you a little bit of background, I think you are all very aware that San Juan County lies in the northern straits of Puget Sound, really in the heart of the Salish Sea. We are a small island-based county, but we have extensive shoreline, so over 400 miles of shoreline. The county is made up of about 248 islands, only 4 of which are served by the Washington State ferry system. So we're a county that is particularly reliant on marine transportation and associated infrastructure. However, the archipelago is characterized by a rich diversity of marine life and habitats. Eelgrass beds are found along over 1/3 of the county's 400+ miles of shoreline. There are over 80 miles of identified forage fish spawning beaches. 22 stocks of Salish Sea Chinook salmon migrate through the nearshore habitats, and these islands are really a critical nursery for outmigrating salmonoids. And there's also important foraging habitat for the critically endangered southern resident killer whale around the islands, as well as many other endangered and threatened species here. The islands have been a thoroughfare for Coast Salish and Strait Salish tribes and Canadian First Nations since time immemorial. And more recently, for Euro-American settlers, providing access to natural resources that have really shaped Indigenous and now Islanders' lifeways. And the importance of these islands for access to treaty and culturally important resources continues today and continues to be really important for tribes in this area. However, as the islands have become increasingly populated, so has development along the shorelines. Some of this development has long since served its purpose, but it remains. And most, if not all, infrastructure that's been constructed with wood has been treated by creosote to protect it and lengthen its life in the marine environment. But creosote-treated wood pilings are a significant source of contamination to these habitats in the Salish Sea. And as creosote leaches into the marine environment, it can impact forage fish spawning habitat, valuable eelgrass beds, and other nearshore habitats and species. And the creosote vapors can also pose a risk to human health. So removing creosote-treated material from the marine environment has become somewhat of an important thing to do for San Juan County. So why remove? Removing creosote, if done correctly, can help to improve water quality, in turn improving conditions for marine habitats and species such as eelgrass. It is a source of polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons to these nearshore habitats, so removing it directly removes the pathway for that contamination, so reducing toxins in forage fish and thus promoting and protecting habitat for juvenile rearing salmon, and also reducing exposure to humans to a known carcinogen. In 2009, due to the concerns regarding the extent of development in the shorelines of the county, Friends of the San Juans undertook a comprehensive shoreline modification inventory. They documented and mapped almost 3,500 modifications that included 472 docks, 77% of which were identified to include creosote wood piles and or decking, 50 marinas, jetties or breakwaters, and 116 piling groupings, 89% of which were identified as having creosote. In 2018, the San Juan County Local Integrating Organization identified the need to build off this study and assess the extent of creosote in the county as a near-term action. So this project that I'm presenting on here today represents the implementation and results of this NTA. This project has been is directly linked to a number of the Puget Sound vital signs that are connected to fish and eelgrass. These vital signs are a measure of ecosystem health and recovery towards Puget Sound recovery goals. The implementation strategies addressed through this project include the marine vegetation strategy, the Chinook salmon strategy, and the toxins in fish implementation strategy. And specifically, this is because there is more documented decline in eelgrass beds in the San Juans than elsewhere in Puget Sound. And the combination of stresses causing these declines are not well understood. Herring is also known to spawn on eelgrass in the San Juans, and spawning has declined in areas in the islands. And chemicals leached out from creosote is known to harm fish embryos and known to cause mortality in herring eggs. So this is a continuing concern. And as I mentioned earlier, the San Juans provide essential nursery habitat for juvenile outmigrating Chinook salmon. So the county undertook a county-wide assessment of creosote piles to really determine the extent of the numbers of piles remaining in the county's nearshore waters. Through doing this, we also tried to identify what has been removed since 2009 and if any new sites had been installed. The overall goals of this project were to conduct a vessel-based survey to count the numbers of piles in county waters, to determine the presence of or distance to sensitive marine habitats, including eelgrass beds, kelp beds, and forage fish spawning habitat. And these data allowed for the creation of a GIS database and a dedicated map book. We also outlined the permitting requirements for removal or replacement of creosote, including the various programmatics available for this kind of work, and assessed the conservation credits available at each of the county-owned marine facilities where creosote was confirmed. And I'll go into in a little more detail why we focused on the county-owned facilities for this. And finally, we compared the inventory results to the 2009 study. So to provide you with a summary of the results, the survey took place over the course of about a week in July 2023. ESA, who we contracted with, they covered approximately 590 sites across 26 islands were surveyed. Weather conditions did preclude the east side of Stewart Island and Waldron from being surveyed, so we collected the data for these sites in April 2024. A total of 8,076 piles were counted in the inventory. Of these, 71.3%, or 5,850, were identified as wood pilings likely to be treated with creosote. The number of pilings at a site ranged from 1 to 170, and on average, sites with no creosote had fewer piles compared to those sites with creosote piles. And this map here just indicates all the locations of the sites assessed as a part of this project, and that included creosote and non-creosote sites. The surveyed sites were compared to available habitat data using GIS to determine if a site was in or in proximity to one of the habitats of interest. So in summary, 60 sites were found to be in or within 100 feet of eelgrass beds. 13 sites were found to be within 100 feet of kelp beds. 64 sites were found to be in or within 100 feet of documented herring spawning habitat. And 28 sites were documented as in or within 100 feet of surf smelt spawning habitat. No sites were found to be within 100 feet of Pacific salmon spawning habitat, however. And this map here, it's hard to see, so apologies for that, but this just indicates the surveyed sites in comparison to those different habitat types. Encouragingly, no new creosote structures were identified, so I think things are working there. But one structure with 146 piles did not appear to have been included in the 2009 inventory, but had been present since at least 2000 based on investigation of historical aerial images. So that site is now incorporated into the updated inventory database. Since 2009, there has been some effort to remove creosote in the county. The Friends of the San Juans worked with, I think, 13 private properties to remove around 168 piles. And in addition, 2 county marine facilities have been upgraded and have replaced the creosote piles that were once present at those facilities. We also just removed a derelict pier at a county-owned site, which removed 132 creosote piles from the nearshore environment on San Juan Island in October 2023. Though we have seen some removals over the past decade plus, these results do indicate that removal or replacement of creosote has been slow. And just to note, assuming that all the surveyed piles were 18 inches in diameter and 40 feet long, there is an estimated 7,344 tons of creosote remaining in the nearshore waters of San Juan County. The challenges with removing creosote, a lot of the creosote, in fact, the vast majority actually is in private ownership. So 94.2% of the sites with creosote identified as present are in private ownership. And with only 4 of the 26 islands being surveyed by or being served by Washington State Ferries, this is not all that surprising. So those folks with properties who live or have properties on outer islands must be able to access those properties, and by boat is the most common way to do that. Publicly owned sites included the marine state parks, of which we have numerous in the San Juans, the ferry terminals, the Bureau of Land Management operated areas. The National Park Service has at least 1 marine facility, San Juan County, and the port districts. The county operates around 13 marine facilities, though only 7 were identified to still include creosote. So in terms of looking at mitigation credits, the county was interested in doing this for the county-owned facilities. And as I mentioned, as an island-based county, we are wholly reliant on boat-based transportation for goods, services, and moving people around. And therefore, maintaining our marine infrastructure is critical. The county's marine facilities must be kept operational for public safety and therefore require maintenance, upgrading, and replacement over time. And as conditions change due to climate-related impacts, there may be other future transportation needs that need to be addressed. So for these reasons, the county is keen to understand what are the numbers of conservation credits that are available through their current facilities, and particularly through the amount of creosote at these facilities. There are currently 7 county marine facilities and 2 county-owned properties where creosote was recorded. These sites total 251 creosote piles, providing an estimated 851 credits available, ranging from 3 to 208 at each site. And these estimates, of course, assumed all creosote was located in the lower shoreline zone. So surveys will be required for each individual site to determine the numbers and tonnage of creosote and other infrastructure to ensure an accurate estimate of the numbers of credits available at each site. So really, these estimates that we calculated through this project should be considered kind of preliminary estimates in that sense. Some sites that are being upgraded or replaced, like the one in this image here, this is Hunter Bay on Lopez Island. It's currently going through a final design and permitting for replacement. And the preliminary calculations suggest that that upgrade of that site will be fully offset by the extent of the creosote and solid decking that can be removed from that site. So that's just very fortunate for that site. However, there are challenges around these conservation credits. And these include not all sites may have enough conservation credits to fully offset the full replacement of them. Also, our local code currently restricts mitigation to only be available in the same stormwater shed as the project. So really, you can only do mitigation where your project site is, and that mitigation isn't necessarily always available. There are no incentives really to remove these materials. And in fact, we're now finding that there's more of an incentive to keep these structures in the shoreline in case it is needed for future mitigation. And of course, the cost and complexity of permitting, particularly for private property owners, is also a challenge. But despite this, I think there are some things and some steps that can be taken going forward. Locally, we can certainly utilize the latest inventory database and map book to track future creosote removal in the county and also to monitor progress. This could be done in partnership with the regulatory agencies, including the local planning department, to track sites where creosote has been fully removed, and also where it has been wrapped, as this is another option for creosote. Monitoring of removal sites is also something that should be considered, so to enable a better understanding of how the natural processes within the drift cell that the site occurs are being impacted. And partnerships should be established between regulatory agencies, local nonprofits, and private property owners to assist with the prioritization of large and now somewhat defunct structures for removal, similar sort of to efforts to address the derelict vessels in the state. And similar to this, there is an opportunity here to explore an incentive program similar to the Shore Friendly program to encourage and assist private property owners with the removal of creosote from their properties. So in conclusion, this project did provide the San Juan County Local Integrating Organization and the county's Department of Environmental Stewardship with updated information regarding the extent of creosote piles remaining in the marine environment in the county. It has also provided data on creosote presence relative to sensitive nearshore habitats, including eelgrass meadows and forage fish spawning habitat, that may be incorporated into ongoing scientific assessments of these habitats, as well as help to prioritize future removals and/or replacement efforts. However, there are some challenges that I noted, particularly regarding progress to removal, as there has been maybe arguably little progress to remove and replace creosote over the last decade. Most of these challenges are related to the fact that the vast majority of creosote remaining in the county is in private property, and there is no incentive to remove it. We do now instead find ourselves in a rather perplexing situation that there is actually more incentive to keep it in place, which is counterproductive to the restoration goals of Puget Sound. And so I will leave it there. That was a very brief overview of the project, but again, there's only so much you can say about counting piles. So it's something we're pleased to have been able to do, and we'll be able to provide the results and the databases to partners that are interested. And I know DNR's Creosote program is particularly interested in this data, and we also plan to provide the data to Washington State Parks, to their marine parks operation side of things as well. So I will just leave it there with some acknowledgements to our local integrating organization, Puget Sound Partnership, Washington Fish and Wildlife, and DNR, and the Habitat Strategic Initiative, as well as ESA for their work in conducting the inventory and GIS assessments, Friends of the San Juans, and my colleagues at Environmental Stewardship. And with that, I think we'll open it up to questions, and I'll hand back to Bree.
Thank you so much for that presentation. It's great. Yes, I haven't seen any questions come in yet to the chat, but if folks have them, you can certainly add them to the chat or come off mute, raise your hand, however you want to do it. I'm sure you've got questions. Right.
I'll jump in. This is Tina
Great.
with Friends of the San Juans. Thanks so much, Frankie. This is great to have this sort of the next phase of this work, and so we can really keep this prioritized. We can talk about this in more detail offline, but I think there might be a way, part of the comparing, right, of these two data sets is that it was done differently. So we had kind of a docks with creosote, but we didn't count all those individual piles. But there might be a way of taking that docks with creosote layer and overlaying with your new creosote maps to try to get at, you know, what portion of those private sites have also been upgraded to steel pilings, because I know some have for sure, sort of through that regulatory process. And I do think it'd be really interesting to see how effective that sort of regulatory tool of when you go through a repair replace process that you have to upgrade, you know, and I think there's a way we could do that without a huge amount of work. And that might be really informative to sort of just say, okay, is that regulatory pressure working? Or are things getting so complicated and people getting bogged down that they're avoiding it, right?
Definitely. I think that's a great suggestion, Tina, and I think it's on my radar as a next step, because I know that was one of the challenges in comparing the two data sets. It was a bit apples to oranges. But I think, yeah.
Yeah, I think if we took that, so we had a docks with creosote layer, right? And then if you put that overlay with where you all found creosote, if we had a docks with creosote layer in a place that you didn't find creosote, I think that would mean that those have been upgraded through and I know like a handful of them off the top of my head of places that have done that. So we could like cross-check it. So anyway, a little bit in the weeds on the next steps, but I think that I really like how you're linking this to sort of the action, right, of thinking about what are the policy and or funding and or incentive kind of changes that need to happen. I think that's really the important piece of this, right, of why we do it.
Thank you, Tina. Michelle, I saw you. Yeah.
I was kind of curious. So my understanding of the Puget Sound partnership is that they don't necessarily, I know that they have preference and priorities identified, but I don't think that they have a mandate to remove creosote pile. I mean, theirs is more at a programmatic level. And I know, Francis, you mentioned that there are limitations where you have to be within the local stormwater watershed in order to apply the credits. And I'm curious if you've had any discussions to see if there's some leeway or some avenue in which the removal of piles could be assessed countywide rather than necessarily like on a smaller scale, given that that would be more or less in alignment with how the Puget Sound Partnership creosote removal program is being applied right now. Seems like there's an opportunity there.
Yeah, I think this is something that we need to address in our local code. So it's actually a restriction at the very local code level rather than the broader state level. So, and it's just something that we have run into here.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, that's good to know. It seems like it would be definitely a worthwhile conversation given how much emphasis is being placed on getting as much creosote out of the Salish Sea as possible. So it seems like it's a really good time to have that discussion and revisit local code.
Cynthia, did you want to chime in on this?
I have a question.
Oh, okay. Go for it.
Well, a comment and a question. I'm really excited to see this work. I think it tells a really compelling story about the need for more support for private landowner action. And And your point about incentives, I think, is really important. Like, how do we build in those incentives? I think we have the regulatory pressure potentially, but there's also, I think we need a carrot as well. I'm wondering, this is making me think a lot about other programs that we have for technical assistance and support for landowners around shoreline armoring and shore-friendly program. Is there a need, do you think, for something similar for private landowners and creosote piling removal or upgrading of docks?
I think there is an opportunity here to explore that. I have not worked with private property owners to do this, but I know Tina, for example, has, and she might have more insight on this, but I certainly have begun to get, as we've sort of done this work and we removed the derelict pier on San Juan Island last year, I have begun to get more phone calls from private property owners about how do we go about permitting this, and how do we do, will you do the permitting for me? And I'm like, I can't do the permitting for you. But so I think there is, especially for some of these, there are some shoreline properties out there that have legacy infrastructure in the shoreline where it was once a cannery or something else, and there's a lot of pilings associated with those, and they're now being required to remove them as part of renewing their aquatic lease. And it's navigating that, I think, is quite challenging for most people who are not in the world of permitting and habitat biology like the rest of us. Most of us, I'm sure, here on the webinar are. Tina, do you have any insights into this?
Yeah, I mean, a couple thoughts, and I think I saw that Chris with DNR was on the phone too, so he could talk about this. So some of the constraints, right? So we have like 600 private docks in San Juan County, and people are being told as part of their lease agreement that when they repair and replace, they need to upgrade to creosote or to, steel pilings. Those upgrades of someone's leased, they have an agreement to do that as part of their permit for that. That's not restoration and not typically fundable with public sources, right? Because if we decide to do that, we could decide to do that in Puget Sound or in San Juan County, but we would need a lot of funding. And so that's one of the key pressure points, is lots of people want to get rid of their creosote, but they're not actually looking at full removal of the structure. So we've been going after kind of the low-hanging fruit and the derelict structures, and but Frankie is right that private landowner, right, that has the degraded dock, even if they're not using it, they hang on to that as a property right almost, right? Even though it shouldn't be, but for a potential future use. So that's one of those pressure points that I think could use some discussion, but we do have to recognize that that would be a huge lift to pay for everybody we would basically just be upgrading everybody's dock. Chris, do you want to chime in on that? So again, we focused on things that are coming out and not going back, not being upgraded.
Yeah, and that's one of the limitations of our program as well, is we're in the removal business, and so once we start talking about replacement, we're pretty limited as far as upgrades go. Additionally, if there's a lease involved, it puts my program a little bit in a weird spot too, so we're not able to help as much. Circling back, I just again wanted to echo that this is an awesome project, and I really am glad to see it happen. San Juan County is not the only group out there that is kind of wrestling with this. Some of the ports are having a similar situation where, they're feeling incentivized to hang on to these derelict structures because they have these, these upgrade and redevelopment needs, which are valid, but it is a bit of a disincentive or a negative feedback loop, I guess you could say. And so that is something that is being brought forward by a couple of different groups. And I think something that's really powerful that's come out of this project that I was just thinking about during your presentation is that you're able to quantify what that actually looks like from an ownership scale. You know, how much of this is a county issue rather than a private recreational dock issue, right? And so I think that's really helpful data for us as a program, but also just for the broader discussion. So yeah, I'm just wanted to kind of echo that this is definitely something that's been brought to light a few times, and we're working at a couple different angles of how we might be able to approach it in the future. Part of our original derelict structures bill that we put forward actually did have a small granting program for private property owners to get some financial support for their redevelopment or removal projects. That did not get funded the first time around of derelict structures, but it's still very much in the works as a way to alleviate some of that or incentivize some of that work from a more private property land owner side of things. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And thank you for you and your team, Chris, participating today. It's great to have you online.
Yeah.
Alex, I'm going to the chat. There's a couple questions that are in the chat, and I want to make sure, Alex, I think we kind of talked a little bit more about the incentive to keep the pilings in place for kind of mitigation credits down the line. I'm hoping that makes more sense to you. I don't know, Francis, if you want to add on to that. And just explain a little bit more, maybe if folks are newer to this space, around why there is this incentive to keep the pilings in place.
My understanding,
yeah, go ahead.
Sure. I mean, my understanding is, and this is something that's been shared with me from folks who've worked for consulting companies and from ports elsewhere who've called me about this, is because of the requirements for conservation credits for mitigation, now for maintenance as well as new development, people are holding on to potential mitigation that they have for when they might need it in the future. So and while they want to remove it, they have the means to remove it. It could easily be removed as part of other projects. They have no way of holding on to those credits from removing it until they have a project where they need to do it sort of in tandem. If that makes sense. I think there are probably people on this webinar who are far more experienced and have greater expertise to speak to that than I do, but I'd be interested to hear from those that are having that direct experience as well.
Michelle, did you want to chime in on this point?
Yeah, I think, Francis, you captured it, and I'll maybe just take what you said a step further. So I'm working with ports of Seattle, Tacoma, and Bellingham on this issue. So for part of their, as part of some of their upcoming permits, this has been at the forefront of discussion for the last couple of years, and this disincentivization to hold on to some of these derelict structures. And what I've gathered, and with discussions with NIMS, is that it's a struggle with the concept of, if you're doing work under one permit, you can't log or ledger or capture those advanced mitigation credits and apply them to a separate consultation. So it all has to do with the way that the permits and work is being permitted. So if work can be captured under the same permit, under the same consultation to assess impacts in a biological opinion, then that work can be done, and those conservation credits can then offset any facility upgrades. But where there's currently a struggle at more of kind of the policy level is in going across consultations. You can't ledger those credits. There's no real system in place currently to allow for that. And that's something that they're that they're trying to work through, because they understand this struggle and this issue with disincentivizing. And the ports in particular obviously have very large structures. And so they have a tremendous amount of creosote that they would like to get out when it's convenient, when they have equipment in the area, and when they can take opportunity to either remove entirely or upgrade. But it has been a challenge, and it really has to do with that cross consultation work across permits.
And I would just add, what I'm hearing from lots and lots of waterfront property owners, right, is that permitting is gotten so complex, and they are not ports, and they don't have professional people doing their permitting, right? So complex and so expensive and so uncertain that there's a fear of even opening the door at all. It's easier to just sort of be like, oh, we could just live with this, right? So I think that's also a disincentive. There is a need to have really good environmental regulations, right? But I think we need to think about how we deliver those in a way that's consistent and clear and timely. So again, that we're not creating a disincentive. And we see that with all kinds of permitting, right? We see it with shoreline armoring, where it's just easier to go just build it without any permit at all, right? So we're really disincentivizing. So it's exciting. And thank you, Frankie, again, for like linking the data with this part of, like, we want to really need to keep moving these conversations along, right? And think about how we can be more effective.
I wanted to add real quick. I guess, well, one thing, as far as, as this information is shared, and as you hear back from potential property owners, if there are folks that are interested in actual removal and not replacement, like, I would really appreciate, if those could get funneled back past us. We're always looking for partners in that side of things. And then circling back to the calculator and some of those struggles with the credits, our program is involved in the calculator and partnering on that work. And part of the strategy was that the larger projects that our program is taking on in the various action areas were meant to seed that bank with a certain amount of credits. And those and this is mostly a product of this just being a new system that's still like being put in place. But at some point there will be, well, even after this summer, some of our largest projects are going into construction, and they will produce, hundreds of credits for that area, in which then you have a landowner who just can purchase the credits when they're ready to do their work, which was the whole concept. But we're in this weird spot right now where there's not those credits sitting there available to that potential project. So just wanted to touch on that. But
thank you. We did get another question come in through the chat, just around what are the I mean, you hinted a little bit to this around the county's next steps. Is it still kind of, is the county still processing the information, or is there prioritization of something that's kind of jumping out as an easy next step from this project?
I think right now it's something that we'll take and share internally with the different departments of the county, and it's something we have a number of marine facilities, as I mentioned, that are currently in the process of undergoing planning and design for upgrade. So having that information available to our public works department for that, for example, is really valuable. And then I think going forward, making these connections with working with Tina at Friends of the San Juans, Chris at DNR, to figure out, there are structures out there that are derelict. Some of them, on private, most of them on private property, and trying to identify and prioritize those to see how we can move the needle on getting those out of the marine. Those are the ones I would like to focus on, because I just see them literally dangling out there. But yeah, I think there's a lot more conversation to be had around this. And I think Tina really hit the nail on the head with the complexity of permitting and those challenges for private property owners. So
I'm curious if anyone on the call is working with private landowners around this issue in other parts of Puget Sound, or has made any headway on this in a different part of Puget Sound. Looks like you're leading out. San Juan. Great. See if there's other questions. Tina, I saw you added a note in here. I think you kind of spoke to this. Was there anything else you wanted to mention around the local mitigation code?
No, I mean, just reminding folks, right? We want to make sure, like, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater when we think about these kind of things. So the intent of that mitigation, and it really is based on actually a state WAC, so it's not just San Juan County, is that so that you don't have like, we're planting 5 trees to offset, you know, shading of eelgrass, right? It's supposed to be in the same watershed, same project type. But I think when we're talking about the marine environment, and especially when Chris is talking about like, we don't even have mitigation to offer people, so then we're at this weird disincentive. So we need to think about some solutions. I would just caution us, like, let's not just throw out the whole mitigation sequencing. Let's really think about, for creosote, maybe that what is the right basin scale, right? Maybe it's not a sub watershed, maybe it's our whole Wyra or something. But that is very much from state code.
That's helpful. Thank you. Has anyone worked? I know that there is some efforts to try to streamline some permitting processes. And I don't know where the creosote piling kind of fits into this kind of larger permitting streamlining process, or if there's been any, movement recently around that permitting alignment streamlining process anyone knows about. Chris, I'm not sure if your program has come across that at all.
Yeah, I mean, it's a hurdle for private property owners, like we was mentioned before. And our program manages our own programmatic permits for piling removal, which is why we can move pretty quickly on some of these projects. But those are very particular requirements, and oftentimes some of the remaining sites that are out there are at a level of complexity that are outside of those permits now. And so I think, yeah, it's a difficult situation also in that the DNR doesn't do a lot of managing of recreational docks. But again, it's all a lot easier if somebody's looking to remove rather than replace, and that's the big filter. Sorry. And that's where we get hung up with a lot of people who are reaching out for help from our program, is once they start talking about replacement, we don't really have a lot to offer. Yeah.
Thank you. It's helpful to understand. Any other questions out there? Feel free to raise your hand, come off mute. I'm just curious if anyone is working on creosote piling removal broadly with your local. It didn't sound like with landowners, but with another county, or just trying to understand if there's a little bit of a community of practice that can be pulled together around this.
Yeah, I will say San Juan County is kind of at the lead from my perspective on this, which is not surprising. But hopefully kind of spurs some additional county involvement. I think it is kind of a unique position that the county plays, that to kind of as an intermediary between these various parties. And so yeah, it's my hope that this can be replicated. I'm definitely going to steal some of the processes used here for some of our survey and stuff around derelict structures. So it's all really valuable work.
All right, Francis, do you have any last parting words for us?
No, I don't think so. I just want to say thank you very much to everyone for joining this morning, and yeah, go about and have a lovely day. It's finally looking like summer. Don't get too close to creosote because it really smells when it gets hot.
Yeah. Well, thank you on behalf of the Habitat Strategic Initiative lead for your work on this. It's a great project, and we were so pleased to fund it and participate with you in this process. Just as a brief, speaking of funding, the Habitat Strategic Initiative lead will be releasing 2 more funding opportunities next week related to sea level rise planning and other lots of soft shore alternatives. So take a look at our website. I'm sure you'll see lots of announcements go around as well. But if those are areas that you're interested in doing work, please follow up with us and we'll make sure you get more information about those funding opportunities being released next week. Thanks all for participating, and we'll catch you next time.